142nd Contact. Tuesday, February 3, 1981, 11:53 p.m. Billy says you've really found the time to visit me today, about which I am very happy. Semyaza says even for me, it is a joy. Billy says of course, I understand, but may I immediately, at the beginning, ask a question? Semyaza says sure, just ask. Billy says you can still remember that I brought you 2 photos during our last contact? Semyaza says yes, those which I was to judge. Billy says yes, exactly. Today, I have something similar, namely a letter again, which clearly indicates that it is a swindle. Here, if you want to read it. Semyaza says thank you, of course, I want to read it. Oh, it is, however, rather long. It will take some time, therefore, have some patience. Semyaza reads for a long time. After that, is this supposed to be a joke, or have these very faulty words been written with seriously deceitful intention? Billy says they are really meant to be serious, obviously in order to perpetrate a fraud. Semyaza says then it truly does concern a fraud, which certainly must be explained by me. The few human races in the area of the Cassiopeia constellation in another space-time configuration are well known to us, but they have no resemblance to the life forms mentioned in this letter. Also, their aircraft do not correspond in any way to the kind described here, and besides, their technology isn't so far and highly developed that they could, with their own aircraft, reach the Earth. The technology of one of the 2 races is presently developed so far that they prepare just the first flight attempts to outer space, and they stand just a little bit behind Earth's technological development. The second race, which is on another planet behind the Cassiopeia constellation, only has aircraft that master their own planetary space somewhat certainly. Among these facts is the further complication that both of these races of human life forms exist in a different time plane in relation to the Earth, like I said, so separated from the time plane that is known to the Earth human being and in which he lives. So when the people of the Cassiopeia constellation one day master space travel, they still won't be able, for a long time, to penetrate into the time plane in which the Earth people live their existence. Billy says and in our time plane known to us, no human life forms exist, who would be capable of space flight in Cassiopeia, that is in that area? Semyaza says sure, there are people there, but these are not yet advanced in space flight or are not yet so far advanced that they could carry out journeys through universal space. Like on the Earth, secret stations of foreign planet human races exist there on their planet, which do not, however, practice direct contact with the planet's inhabitants. Billy says I understand. But now, another question: how many of all solar systems have planets that are actually inhabited by people, which are visible from the Earth and which are known to us? If one believed all alleged contact reports of Earth people with extraterrestrials, practically all solar systems will be inhabited. Semyaza says sure, your words correspond to the truth. Truly, there are only very few solar systems inhabited by human life forms that are known to the Earth human being, and on the other hand, a lot of suns have no planetary systems. To these facts, there is still to add that many of the space-traveling races that come to the Earth are not resident in the time plane known to the Earth human being. Billy says we already spoke very often about space-traveling human races that do not belong to you and which come, nevertheless, to the Earth. In which time plane do they all belong? Semyaza says it is different for each. To mention all of them would be difficult and time-consuming. Billy says then let's say, for example, the people of the area of Alpha Centauri, then Reticuli, or whatever it is, then. Semyaza says the first ones live a tiny fraction of a second shifted from the Earth time plane, so therefore they cannot be reached by Earth inhabitants before they master time travel. The second human race you mentioned also does not live in the same time plane as the Earth people. You should be content with this because it would all be too much for today if we wanted to clarify these matters. Billy says, well, then let's just stay with the letter then. This Josef von Derker, who wrote this letter, is just another spinner. Semyaza says he belongs to the same group as those two of whom you brought me during the last contact visit the photos of the model heads. Billy says then the case is clear. I just don't understand one thing. This funny and crazy letter arrived into the hands of Wendell Stevens, who sent it for further examination of the situation to Herbert Runkle, who, in turn, presented it to me. Now, at the same time, I don't understand how and why Wendell doesn't check such things more closely and why he too gullibly supposes that behind such obvious, idiotic nonsense, there could be a degree of truth. Even in other similar cases, I have already determined this. Wendell is just too gullible. Semyaza says he is a researcher and a seeker but, unfortunately, not a true expert, and besides, he is too credulous. Billy says it also seems so to me. Semyaza says just with the photos and with this letter, it should have hit him that something can't be right and doesn't correspond to the truth. Especially with this letter, it would have had to hit him that an attempted fraud was present because certain similarities to your writings unmistakably point to the fact that these are clearly based on the fact that your written material was reproduced in a distorted and fraudulent form. A lot of this very clearly and without a doubt points to the fact that this person, Josef von Derker, has falsified compositions from your writings and from our contact reports in his own favor and has maliciously and intentionally written them down as his own experiences. Billy says, aha, we have already determined this. So then, it is true that this guy has stolen material from my writings. Semyaza says sure, because that is unmistakable and clear. Billy says it's just a pity that such a fast one can be pulled on Wendell. Semyaza says that is a true word because he strives for the truth in a serious and extremely honest and correct manner in relation to all of these interests. It would be better for him if he consulted more with you for the clarification of such interests because you are the only person on the earth who has the necessary insight and knowledge and experience with respect to extraterrestrial life and missiles and aircraft of the same, in order to be able to be helpful to him in regards to this with good, honest and sure advice. Billy says I have certain experiences, knowledge, and insights. Yes, that's right, but of this, I don't want to make too much advertising. All too quickly, it would be said that I contest and deny the experiences, observations, and contacts of others out of selfishness and for reasons of making myself out to be great. And unfortunately, this is exactly what I would have to do with approximately 98% of all cases because at least this round percentage falls under lying, deception, charlatanry, and forgery, etc. Semyaza says nevertheless, it would be of great benefit for Wendell Stevens if he received your advice and your knowledge in such matters. Billy says if that should be his wish, I will help him, of course. Semyaza says that is good. Billy says then this case is also dismissed. Semyaza says may I now ask you a question? I assume that I may do so on your birthday. Billy says if you do not shun the answer. Semyaza says no, then I may ask. Billy says certainly. Semyaza says thank you. During my last visit, I asked you about our continuation of the contacts. Billy says I know, and I also understand. Now, yes, I have already thought about it. Semyaza says I don't want to push you for an answer because we have agreed that you would answer me when you go on the trip for the film and photo work. Billy says I know, but I have really thought about it, and as well as the things stand, I can, indeed, give you the answer already. I will make a start again and, thus, resume the contacts. Semyaza says, that is dear of you. I always knew, through my foresight, that you would not break, in spite of all the ugly events of recent years, and that you would continue with a better feeling again because you simply can't throw away your obligation. Billy says then you have recognized it well. Semyaza says for your decision, I am to pay you the thanks of all of us. Billy says thank you, then, all of you knew this? Semyaza says there were never any doubts for us about the fact that you would take up your work again as soon as possible, as soon as you were healthy enough to be able to do so. Nevertheless, we made calculations that told us with 100% certainty that you had not reached a final decision when you interrupted the contacts. We found out that your action was only one of self-preservation because your strength wasn't enough anymore. You never had the intention of regarding the discontinuation of the contacts as being final. However, we understand this very well, and we ourselves could not have come to a better decision if we had been put before such by you. However, you could have spoken calmly with us about this because we would have understood you very well. Billy says unfortunately, I wasn't healthy enough to be able to do so. It was all just too much for me. Semyaza says that is very well known to me. Billy says I will, indeed, continue, but no longer in the center. I think that I will no longer return when I go on the trip for the photo work. Semyaza says a change of location would be very good for you, especially if you would live in the warm south. Also for Engelbert, this would be a necessity for his health. But with all of this, I see problems concerning your family. Billy says I know, but I will also go alone, then, this problem solves itself. Semyaza says however, you can't be serious because you know, nevertheless, that certain circumstances require that your entire family is always with you. Without your family, you cannot fulfill your task. The connections are well known to you. Billy says I know that, but I can still do my work as far as it is possible. Semyaza says however, this work would be pointless because for the time being, it could never be carried out and be fulfilled in such a way as is necessary. Billy says but there really isn't any other way. Part of the work, at least, would still be done. Really, girl, I can't do it any other way anymore because my wife thwarts me. Semyaza says then you have to discuss these matters thoroughly with her some other time. Billy says I am tired of this. I can't do this anymore. Semyaza says then Engelbert and Guido should take care of this matter. They will find the right words for her because they both truly know of the importance and requirements of our and your mission. Billy says I won't make an attempt to win both of them for this impossibility. Semyaza says but it must be, for it is of utmost importance for the continued existence and fulfillment of the mission. Billy says unfortunately, there is no understanding for the extension of the family. Semyaza says you mean with your wife? Billy says of course. She doesn't make any attempts to delve herself into this matter. Semyaza says it is, however, of unconditional necessity that she does this, otherwise, there really is no hope for the fulfillment of the mission. Even a partially continuing work on your part or on our part would really have no value. It's enough to make one cry. You are now approaching a better mental health again, and there, in your immediate and most important surroundings, everything is attempted and undertaken to destroy everything again, before there can even be a fresh start. Nevertheless, I want to ask Engelbert and Guido. Billy says please, don't talk any more about that. Semyaza says but this must be done. Billy says this is very serious to me because I can't continue this drama anymore. Rather, I'll really give up everything and will also no longer continue to do work that is still possible for me. Semyaza says however, there must be a solution because such is the only way to continue everything. Billy says there is no solution because such a blockhead like my wife can't be reached. And now, I really wouldn't like to talk about it anymore. If it just has to be, then so also shall my work be. Semyaza says then under these circumstances, it will probably be so. But will you still keep to your work regarding the films and photographs? Billy says of course, because it is also my springboard. Semyaza says then until then another solution might be able to be found if Guido and Engelbert. Billy says now it's the last straw for me. If you don't stop flashing that at me, then I'll disappear once and for all. I am really suffering the drama with my wife. Semyaza says I am sorry, let's talk of something else. Billy says I like this tone better. Semyaza says do you, perhaps, have any other questions? Billy says I do, if I may ask. Semyaza says sure. Billy says so then can you explain to me exactly where the safest place for survival would be if the Great World War should actually break out? Even though we've often talked about this, you've never given me precise clues. Semyaza says nevertheless, you know that really is the safest place. Then, secondly, comes, wherein a suitable survival place would have to be created. Billy says you told me that many times, but the first one is simply impossible because it would cost billions of sums if we wanted to build a hideout there. Also, there will be a political quarrel there because the earthly nations have decided together that it should remain a neutral area. But at the moment it wouldn't be neutral for the nations anymore if people firmly settled there. The second place would be much better climatically than the first, but a suitable station for survival in real security would still cost, at least, many millions even there. But certainly, it could still be created there if we had enough people and money or could find this within a short time. But those are really the only two recommendable places. Semyaza says you spoke of the greatest possible security for survival. Yes, these two would be the only truly safe places. Billy says in Europe, no place can be found where there could be safety, right? Semyaza says prior to any war, no. In this regard, there will be no security at all. Only in reference to earthquakes can safe or reasonably safe zones be mentioned. Billy says like Hinterschmidt-Ruti. But this is of no use to us if the great thumping, nevertheless, comes one day. Semyaza says until then, you'd already have to be in security, with all necessary material, etc. That is, if you can actually continue your work and the whole mission is to be fulfilled. Otherwise, settling down in a safe place would have no meaning. Billy says of course, because what human life should be protected and be preserved if, through perversity and selfishness, etc., this life is, one way or another, unalterably exposed to decay and destruction? Semyaza says it sounds inhumane, but it reflects the truth. But it would be good if everything, Billy says leave this now, please, it profits nothing. One shouldn't cry over the loss of lost or declining things. Only fools cry about losing. Semyaza says it is shocking to hear this profound truth from your mouth in this respect. Billy says maybe, but now, can you still answer another three-part question for me? Semyaza says sure. Billy says it concerns the forms of time travel, if you want to give me information about this. Semyaza says ask. Billy says good, thank you. Yes, recently, I had a video rental. Its title was The Final Countdown. The story goes that an American aircraft carrier was driven by a magnetic storm into a dimension gate and was hurled from the year 1980 into the year 1941. Then, by an accident, so to speak, a crew member of the ship stayed behind in 1941, while the aircraft carrier returned to the year 1980 again by a new magnetic storm and by the dimension gate. Now, in the film, the left-behind crew member, who was approximately 30 years old in 1980, logically lived on from the time of 1941. This seems to be rather logical to me according to my knowledge. Now, however, comes what can no longer be logically placed into reality. The crew member left behind in 1941 pursued the outlet of the aircraft carrier in 1980, and this man, who would have had to become 69 years old in the meantime, could see himself as he went about as an approximately 30-year-old crew member on the ship, which then transported him, via the magnetic storm, into the past. According to this story, he would have been left behind in the year 1941 and then would have witnessed his own birth in 1950 and then would have lived parallel with himself for 30 years, so once young and once old. Semyaza says that is impossible. Billy says precisely, nevertheless, it is impossible if both want to live in the same time plane, both who are, nevertheless, only one person. The one staying in the past of 1941 would have had to die in 1949 at the latest, after which he would then have to be born again in 1950. This is so because the spirit form of the man is the same one at both times of his life, right? Semyaza says that is very clearly explained. So it behaves in reality. Billy says well, such a coexistence of life would only be possible if two different dimensions existed. Semyaza says that's right. Billy says good, then this case is clear. Then to the next one, many people are of the view that they could do different things in the past and change the future if they had the opportunity for a journey into the past. But according to my knowledge, this is impossible because the future and the apparent present have already happened, that is, because the events of the future follow from the ones that already occurred in the past. Therefore, a man could not travel, for example, into the past to kill his own father or mother. He was begotten and born by a mother. Therefore, if a man returned to the past to kill his mother or his father still before his birth, then this past traveler could have never been born. Is this right? Semyaza says sure. Billy says good, so far so clear. Everything would be a paradox. And just to get around such a paradox, one would have to switch off the laws of space and time, so such a journey to the past can never take place in the way that the time-traveling person also actually arrives in the same material plane that exists in the past. And this also applies to the future. However, this also means that space and time are different in their expansion and in their speed in the past and in the future, which has the consequence for the time traveler that he penetrates into another dimension that is not handy for him materially. He could, indeed, live in this other dimension and exist if the living conditions there allowed it, but he couldn't enter into connection with the life forms there if he didn't have special aids for this. He would remain virtually invisible to the life forms of the past or future, or he could be recognized, at most, as silhouettes. Am I properly oriented there? Semyaza says your explanation corresponds to the facts. Billy says so this also means that with the events of the film, the final countdown, a certain logic does, indeed, play along with them, but in truth, the one staying in the past obviously couldn't have lived on in material form in the normal time plane, even if he would have then skillfully died in 1949. He only could have lived on in an invisible form or, at most, as silhouettes in the next possible time dimension during the time from 1941 to 1980, but not in material form, as this was given from 1941 to 1980, when the young man was born and was later launched with the ship into the past. Is this also right? Semyaza says surely. Billy says now it starts to take form. Now, if people or machines and such travel into the past or the future, these are invisible there to the people or other life forms living there, although the time travelers can live there if they find suitable living conditions. This is in contrast to when people or machines simply penetrate into parallel times and, thus, into parallel dimensions, which are temporal and spatial and are, thus, exactly materially the same as the time plane from which the time travelers came. This is so even if such another parallel dimension was created somewhat sooner or later than the one from which the time travelers came. It's just important that the spatial and temporal relationships are exactly the same, right? Semyaza says why do you always ask me if you have sufficient knowledge about this? Billy says I just want to be sure. Well then time travel into the past or future is always other dimensional than the past or future itself. Now, however, the possibility exists, as I know from Ask It and from you and was also allowed to experience myself, that there are technical possibilities for one to make himself visible in the past or in the future and to communicate with the life forms there. However, this can only happen if the matter of the time traveler is condensed by technological devices or by consciousness forces to such an extent that the life form becomes visible as a body of energy, which one can pass through, however, because it remains, in any case, differently dimensioned. Did I say this right? Semyaza says surely. Billy says so. Next, the aforementioned relates to time traveling with the aid of purely natural or technological processes, as they are known to human and other life forms or will one day become known, according to their level of development. Time travels, therefore, offer no possibility at all for changing any events which already happened in the present or future, in the past. To these forms, however, there is still to be added that a time travel exists which comes about via pure consciousness-related forces and by what means it is possible to materialize oneself in the past or in the future, but for help in each case, the matter of the past or of the future must be taken. Nevertheless, a life form only becomes strong in this ability if he is accordingly developed in his consciousness evolution and lives out the necessary love for that purpose. This means that such a life form is no longer capable of committing illogical violence against the laws of nature. Thus, he never even enters into temptation anymore if he travels to the past or to the future, to commit illogical violence, such as wanting to change the future through additional acts or deeds in the past. On the other hand, his logical understanding is already so highly evolved that he already recognizes and knows that nothing more can be changed in the past that would shape the future differently than what has already happened, for the future, from which the time traveler came, has already happened as an effect of the preceding causes. If now, however, a time traveler materializes in the past or in the future and meets himself there, then this will also happen in the future if he came from there, because the spirit, that is the spirit form, of the time traveler from the future also materializes in the past or in the future, depending on whether the trip leads from the future to the past or from the past to the future. This happened, for example, when I traveled with Askit into the past and then also into the future, and it also happened when I performed the experiment in Hinwil with the letters, which I then carried in the past, 2 days before the date of writing, to the post office. Semyaza says that's all correctly explained. It's just that for the Earth people, everything will be very confusing and incomprehensible. Billy says I've already often experienced this because for normal thinking people, these things seem to be confusing and crazy. I've also noticed this in each case when talk was made about time traveling, which I performed with you. Time and space are still inexplicable to the person of Earth, even though everything is easy to understand. Semyaza says that is understandable because the Earth human being still has no great knowledge about space and time. But on the other hand, you yourself have forgotten another important factor in your explanations, namely that time traveling can also be carried out in a materialized form in the past or future with technological assistance, just as we have demonstrated it to you. Billy says I haven't forgotten that, and on the other hand, I even spoke of it when I mentioned time traveling with the help of consciousness forces. Semyaza says sure, but that technical age can become highly effective time-traveling missiles through the power of consciousness. You did not mention this. Billy says no, I thought that I shouldn't talk about it in such an open manner. Semyaza says it is also incomprehensible to the Earth person that he can't arrange any disaster with this knowledge. Hence, you could have calmly mentioned these interests and facts. Billy says previously, however, I wasn't allowed to do this. Semyaza says quite simply because at that time, it still would have raised too many problems for the various interested parties, in which they would have hopelessly entangled themselves. Billy says that has, indeed, also already happened. Some have nearly gone mad. Semyaza says that is known to me, but now, this danger should be avoided. Billy says as you mean. Semyaza says it is as I say. Billy says then that's also good. In regards to this, that was actually everything that I had to say about time traveling, except that now, I have the problem that we've talked too long, and nevertheless, I promised to be with my guests again in about 30 minutes. But now, 1.5 hours have passed and somehow, I ought to be back again at the right time. Semyaza says you know that this is no problem. Billy says of course not, with your infernal machine of a ship, indeed, nearly anything is possible. Semyaza says I will come down to your workroom with you for a few minutes if you will allow me. Billy says logically. Semyaza says then we'll go back in time about 75 minutes. Billy says that's enough, then I can possibly go back into the kitchen again at 12:30 am. Semyaza says then now, position yourself here. Billy says what is that? Semyaza says you would say that it is a time transmitter. Billy says there are all kinds of new stuff in this new ship. Can you explain this in a little more detail once? Semyaza says not today. Billy says I agree with you, but I would still have a question now when you restore me back to time in each case. This is, once more, another kind of time travel. But how this works, I have not yet found out with all my contemplating. It is only clear to me that this type of time travel has nothing to do with forms, of which we have spoken just now. Semyaza says I will explain this to you once in detail, when everything is in place. But about this form of time travel, you may give no one information. Now, however, we should go. Billy says okay. Semyaza says so here we are. It's nice to be in your workroom once again, and this time, I brought my protective device. Billy says that was also wise, when I think of the accident at that time. Semyaza says yes, in this, I've done well, because someone is outside. Do you hear the faint sounds? Billy says no, but it seems to be better if you go back before something happens again. Semyaza says I think so, too. Farewell, my friend, and think again about everything that we've discussed regarding the work and mission. Until we meet again. Billy says goodbye, girl, bye, and I will think about it. Greet everyone rather nicely for me. Semyaza says gladly, thanks. Also pay my dear greetings. Until we meet again. The end.